Hello everyone, welcome to THLGK. Today's episode has been inspired by the controversy regarding the casting of the upcoming movie The Odyssey, in particular the casting of Helen of Troy, that here as you can see is a black actress. And as people was pointing this out on X, even before the movie premiered, let alone released to the general public, other people were quick to note how most of those had no problem with the casting of another movie that's coming. This one is 2027, The Resurrection of Christ, which placed a white actor as Jesus. So, I thought appropriate for us to discuss today what was the color of Jesus. Because, as you can see, everyone cares so much, so deeply about history, about what's historical, about historical accuracy, even in our entertainment. Movies, which everyone knows, never really depict something 100% accurate, but anyway, everyone cares about this in a profound manner. So let's try and answer this question historically and see that if by the end of the episode people will still care about history, about being historically accurate as much as they do. Let's get into it. Before we answer the question, we have to address two extremely important topics. The first one is, what is historical? Right? This is very important. Most people don't know what it entails to make the affirmation that something is or isn't historical. When it comes to this, we are talking here about science. But science basically has a huge divide. In one side you have the so-called hard sciences, the biological, natural physical sciences, what most people think when they hear the word science. People in the lab coats, performing experiments, testing something, retesting hypotheses, analyzing, questioning. What can lead us to the truth, let's say, in the very superficial way. And on the other side of the divide, you have the so-called social sciences, and more specifically, in our case, history. This is very important. While in the hard sciences, you basically have the object of analysis, right, or aiming to reach the object, or theorizing about the object, which in any case is reachable, like for instance a black hole. We've never been to a black hole, but still you can theorize about it. And one day we might develop enough that we might be able to go there. But when it comes to history, that's impossible. When it comes to history, we no longer have the object of analysis. I mean, think about this. What happened on August 13th, 53 BC? We don't know. It's gone. We cannot reach it anymore. We cannot analyze it. We cannot test. We cannot retest. So when it comes to history, and this works, the further back we go, is more like this than anything. When it comes to history, we deal with probabilities. In many, many cases. Meaning, we don't know what happened. We don't know because we can't access it. It's gone. So we deal with what is probable. That's why, for instance, when you talk about religion and the dating of some texts, we give a long period of time. For instance, when were the Gospels written? If you think of Mark, you can have people saying from 65 to 70 to 75 AD. So you have here a 10-year period, and this is the most conservative dating, by the way, a 10-year period in which the book could have been written. But when was it written? Pinpoint exactly the year. I'm not even saying the month or the months. Pinpoint the year. We can't. So you give the probability. The most probable dates are between 65 and 75. That's the terrible thing about analyzing history, at least scientifically. And you might think, oh, how about archaeology? We can have archaeological evidence of things. Yes, but usually when an archaeological evidence becomes proof of something, it tends to be related to the hard sciences. For instance, you can analyze a city and discover that the city was destroyed by an earthquake. So you have to go to geology to do it. But when it comes to texts, right, which is what most people think about when they think about history, and it is what you rely most when you think about history. When it comes to texts, the written archaeological evidence, things are not as simple as they make us believe, because humans are the worst variable of all. Right? And we all know this. Why? Because humans lie. Humans deceive. Humans get things wrong. Humans are biased. And so on. Let me put here. We are not really trustworthy sources. So when you have a historical element we want to investigate, and you have a text, the text serves as evidence, but not proof. Because nobody knows if the person who wrote the text was lying, if the person who wrote the text had different intentions, if they were manipulating. We don't know. So what is the process of knowing? And this is the most central part of this element. Knowing. to know. What does it mean to know? To affirm something as historical? Well, you have to follow the scientific methodology. Oops. And that starts with, you usually have a question, an insight, an archaeological find. Then you have to elaborate hypotheses. In simple terms, the hypothesis is an attempt to explain a historical event. You are trying to explain, so you create as many hypotheses as you can think. What happened? What could have happened? And you raise the hypothesis. And in this first moment, you have to gather arguments plus evidence. And I have to give a little sidetrack here, because how many times have you seen the word evidence being used in articles, in videos, in speeches? And most of the time, at least when it comes to religion, it's used wrong, because they are using evidence as a synonym for proof. Evidence is not proof of anything. The evidence here, let me pick this image here. So many people know what this is. This is a Lego set, right? Lego pieces. So if we are to imagine what arguments and evidence are, they are this: the little pieces that are used to build the final set, right? In the hypothetical phase, we don't have the final set. So you start building, picking these pieces and building what you imagine could have been. And then it starts taking shape. So when you hear something like evidence of the resurrection, evidence of Noah's Ark, evidence of the Ark of the Covenant, and you can easily replace the word for proof, like here, we are proving it existed. Be wary, because you are probably being manipulated. Because again, arguments and evidence are the easiest things to be corrupted. Because if you follow the scientific process correctly, you get a result. We don't know what the result is. But if you corrupt the process to get the result you want, then it's no longer scientific, but it has the appearance of being scientific. So when you hear these things like, oh, evidence of this, evidence of that, pay close attention, because you could have been played. And most of us know this. Think about a trial. One piece of evidence, it's usually not enough to convict or absolve anyone. So let's say it's a murder trial, and you have a body, and you find a fingerprint on the collar of the person who was murdered. The fingerprint is evidence. But the fingerprint doesn't prove the person who owns the fingerprint to be the murderer. Because the fingerprint could have been there from hours earlier. Maybe you changed shirts. The murder victim changed shirts with someone and the fingerprint was there. There are many possibilities why the fingerprint was there. It's different, for instance, if we find a video of someone shooting another person. That's not evidence, that's proof. Here we have proof that this person shot this one and the person who was shot died. It's no longer evidence. I'm focusing on this because this is where a lot of people are deceived, especially when it comes to religion. And I'm going to show you in a bit, but let's first continue the scientific methodology. When you gather enough arguments and evidence that the hypothesis becomes, let's say in simple terms, strong enough, then you can have a theory. The theory is an explanation of a historical event. Now, this basically is an attack and defend phase. You still have to gather arguments and evidence to fortify the theory. At the same time, you are trying to defend people who are arguing against those arguments, against that evidence. And then you have to defend. This is the whole process. Because once the theory cannot be attacked anymore, with a little caveat, I'm going to get to this, then what we have is the fact. The fact is the historical event. The fact is what happened. It's only in the realm of facts that we can use the word to know. When you can affirm something, it's because you have a fact. If you don't have a fact in the theoretical and hypothetical phases, all you do is dealing in probabilities. The fact is what happened. The fact is history. And you can imagine, with what we talked before, it's not something easily to arrive to. And yes, it's not. The further back we go in time, the harder it is for us to have facts. But it's not impossible. Look, in our context, if you have a Bible, or you open a Bible online, the Bible itself, a library of books, it's a historical fact. The texts of the Bible are historical facts. But the contents of the text, those are up for question. It's a very important distinction. So the texts are historical fact because someone, thousands of years ago, wrote those words. That's undeniable. Now, what's questionable is, are the words they wrote real? Are they historical or not? A little spoiler, most of them aren't. You have some things that are historical, that are facts, some contents of the Bible that are facts, but the vast majority that could be historical are still in the hypothetical and theoretical phases. Meaning, we don't know if they're real or not. Remember, a lot of things we know are made up. A lot of things we know that are false. I'm going to present you one in a bit. But of the minority that might have been historical, very few we can say, oh, these are facts, those happened as they are described, or similarly to how they are described. But the vast majority of those are still in the hypothetical or theoretical phases. Because if it's not a fact, we don't know. We can't make an affirmation, positive or negative, about anything historical if we don't have the fact, if we don't have proof it happened. And this is what is leading us to the second point. But before we get to that, this is very important. In science, nothing is sacred. So even facts can be questioned. But how do we question a fact? How do you question anything historically? It's not simply saying, oh, I don't agree with this. Oh, I don't think this is real. No, you have to follow the process. If you have a historical fact, for instance, you have to break down all the arguments and evidence that are used to support the fact. Once you break it all down, you go argument by argument, evidence by evidence, showing how those, for instance, could have been corrupted, how the information could have been manipulated. You present counterfacts that were ignored. And if you question this way, following the methodology, you might be able to dethrone an established fact. Because one of the problems with science is that it's not, let's say, quote, pure. Science receives a lot of external influence that can affect its results. So we might have facts that are not facts, but are impositions to manipulate us. And this is what leads us to the second extremely important point in our trajectory to answer the question. Now, the second extremely important element we need to discuss is one I have to start by saying, wait before you react. Because this one is the one that tends to make people completely kick history behind. Was Jesus historical? I mean, I hope you can see why this question is important, so we can answer something about Jesus' ethnicity. Was Jesus historical? So, the complication here comes from what we just talked about. We have a historical question. So, we raise hypotheses. Yes, he was. No, he wasn't. Those are two possible hypotheses to try and answer the question. And those are two valid hypotheses to this day. And let me say this, and I will repeat this because people tend to think, simply because I don't believe in religion, that I would go for the second hypothesis. No, he wasn't. You are incorrect. I believe, I have high confidence, I have given the arguments and evidence, I think the highest probability is that yes, he was real. Jesus was real. But this is one of the cases where science has been corrupted, because we believe we have high confidence, the evidence and arguments are stronger than the other hypothesis, doesn't mean the other hypothesis isn't real. Because the, let's say, sad reality is that there is no proof Jesus was real. There are good arguments. There is strong evidence, but no proof. Again, I'm not saying this to give credence to the second. No, I don't think there is enough to prove Jesus wasn't real. But you can't prove he wasn't real the same way you can't prove he was. In the end, we don't know if he was or wasn't. This is the most important thing in the discussion. Which, by the way, I'm going to show you now. First, here's a little example that you can find online. There was this comment a few months ago. This post saying, posts like this are funny because, sure, but Jesus wasn't a real guy. There is no evidence beyond anecdotal that he was real, and most details of his life are borrowed from other religions. So it's like a bunch of people arguing over what Hercules looked like. This person made this comment, and a lot of people went against it, and you can see they even got a community note, which will be the last thing we are going to read. But look at this comment, at these reactions. The first one is, no serious scholar believes this. Mysticism is relegated to the far fringe of theories about Jesus. They're using theories here, apparently in places of hypothesis, but anyway. You see, this person showed no proof. They relied on no serious scholar, but again, who determines what a serious or not serious scholars are? Mysticism is relegated to the far fringe. Again, who determines what fringes are? There is no proof Jesus is real, which is unlikely. For instance, a little comparison, Hitler. Right? You don't need consensus, you don't need scholars to show Hitler was real. You have proof here, you have video, you have audio, you have papers from those who agree with him, from those who are his enemies. There are proof. You can present the proof. When it comes to science, be very, very careful with things like this. We are going to get into this in a bit more detail. Now, the second comment, I'm not a Christian, but the strong consensus of even secular historians is that Yeshua of Nazareth was real. Was a real specific person who was crucified. Jesus' mysticism is a weird and unnecessary cope for a certain kind of atheism. Again, this person providing no proof. They are relying on strong consensus. And the final comment I selected, Jesus was almost definitely a real person, and nearly every credible secular and atheist historian agree with this. This one is quite nice because the person said almost definitely. This is good. You're basically saying, well, the hypothesis is very strong. And it's true, almost every credible and atheist historian agree with this. But again, no proof, because the community note itself presents no proof. Look, virtually all modern scholars of antiquity agree that Jesus existed historically. The question of historicity was generally settled in scholarship in early 20th century. We are not being presented any proof. only that scholars agree, consensus. Modern scholars, atheism, secular historians. Now let's see. Let's go to the source of this community note. And today, for brevity, I'm only going to read the first paragraph. And it starts like this. The historicity of Jesus is a debate, quote, on the fringes of scholarship and in popular culture regarding whether Jesus historically existed or was a purely mythological figure. Mainstream New Testament scholarship ignores the non-existence hypothesis and its arguments, as the question of historicity was generally settled in scholarship in the early 20th century, and the general consensus among modern scholars is that Jesus of Nazareth existed in the Herodian kingdom of Judea and the subsequent Herodian Tetrarchy in the 1st century AD, upon whose life and teachings Christianity was later constructed. Again, point to a single proof they presented. They haven't, because there isn't any. There is no proof Jesus existed. Again, we have strong arguments, we have good evidence, but no proof. What you have here is an outside force brute forcing a scientific hypothesis, Jesus was real, into a fact. So yes, Jesus was real is no longer a question, but is a statement of fact. It isn't. This is conviction being brute forced into fact by the corruption of science. Because look, let me try and prove that to you. The historicity of Jesus, it's saying, is on the fringes of scholarship. Who determines that? Right? And here against the mainstream New Testament scholarship. Okay. You see how the text is leading us? Fringes, mainstream. As if those who are not in the mainstream are wrong. They are on the fringes. But here's what I want you to think about. I mean, seriously think about this. When it comes to Christianity, who do you think make the bulk of the researchers and scholars? Who do you think are the people who are researching this as academics, which is a career path? Most of them are religious people. And again, what Christianity, with all its differences, right? You have Catholics who don't agree with Baptists, who don't agree with Presbyterians, all of this mess. But what is the one thing they can't exist without? Jesus. So if Jesus is a question, if the historicity of Jesus is not established, and to this day it isn't, regardless of how likely it is that he is real, and I again agree with that, but if you can prove it, you can't make statements of fact. You can't say Jesus did, Jesus said, Jesus commanded. So religion can't live without Jesus, Christianity in this example. So do you think the, quote, mainstream, and we are going to hear here the general consensus among modern scholars, do you think that the majority of people unable to maintain their sets of belief without Jesus will have zero bias? how easy it is to form a consensus with something people can't live without. Because, guys, I mean, we do have the 2019-2020 debacle, which was the scientific consensus and it's not the scientific consensus anymore. But here's the thing, and I have to sincerely apologize for this. Caps was turned on, so the question is a abominable thing, but this is something anyone can ask. How many times since modern science has consensus been overturned? Ask that to any AI you want, or go to the books and search the literature. How many times the consensus has been overturned? In other words, been proven wrong. And here's the response. There is no single number for how many times the scientific consensus has been overturned, as science rarely discards established theories overnight. Instead, major shifts, often called paradigm shifts, occur to the gradual accumulation of new evidence. Yes, AIs are as biased in favor of science as they are in favor of religion, because those two elements, and I'm going to tell you the biggest secret there is, can be used to manipulate us. Like, consensus is a manipulation tool. I talked about this in the 4th episode on this podcast, I believe. Manipulation to authority. Consensus basically replaces God. You have the highest form of authority, which you have to bow your head and accept. Why is something like this? Because God says so. Why is this real? Because consensus. Consensus doesn't prove anything. In fact, if you hear the word consensus, most likely you are being manipulated. So check the arguments, check the evidence that it's provided, check the logical construction that is sustaining this so-called consensus. Then you see if it makes or makes sense. And this is coming from a person who agrees with the consensus of Jesus being real. I want to hammer this as many times as I can. I agree with the consensus, but I'll be damned if I won't point out how they are trying to manipulate us. They called paradigm shifts. In other words, the consensus was proven wrong and they change it. They love this kind of words that try to mask what really is. You had a consensus, the consensus was wrong, so you change it. Which is funny, right? Because we could take consensus seriously if 100% of the time consensus was right. It's still a dangerous thing to do. Even if a person you know is 100% right, they could get something very important wrong someday. But it's more reliable than the alternative. But no, you can ask these questions yourselves. There is no single number. Many, many times consensus has been overturned, has been proven wrong. And I'm going to show you one of my favorite scientific consensus that has been proven wrong. This is 18th, 19th, early 20th centuries. This is not opinions. This is a consensus that had multiple thousands of scientific published articles. Do you know what it is? It has to do with the theme of this episode. Here we go. Was there a scientific consensus black people were inferior to white people? It's a leading question because I know the answer. And the response is yes. For centuries, 18th, 19th, early 20th, a false consensus known as scientific racism was promoted by many scientists in Western world to justify racial hierarchies and white supremacy. However, it was based on manipulated data and flawed methodologies, and modern science has entirely debunked these theories. This is a consensus that lasted for over 200 years. Search yourself. This is something from before the woke era. You can find the papers here. How many scientific articles were published defending scientific racism? It's impossible to provide an exact number of scientific articles published defend scientific racism, as the total ranges from thousands of historical pseudoscientific works. Pseudoscientific is a modern addition, right? At the times they were scientific works. At the times this was the consensus. And this is what I want to show you guys. Consensus, which is entirely what these people who are trying to manipulate us into believing the hypothesis of Jesus not being real has been debunked. The question of historicity was generally settled in the 20th centuries. Ignores the non-existence hypothesis. This is all a manipulation for us to pretend it is not, it is still unknown. The existence of Jesus, no matter the side you choose, is still undetermined. Yes, I think once again that he was real, but what I think isn't necessarily historical. Here's the... So we can get to a close here. You can ask AI, look, was Jesus historical? You get a categorical answer. Yes. And a full stop. Yes. And then they continue. Virtually all modern historians, including secular and agnostic scholars, agree that Jesus is a historical person. See, proof? No. Consensus again. Virtually, and look how it's phrased. Virtually all. It's not all. Do you know why it's not all? Because of this. Is there a possibility, however small, Jesus wasn't real? Look at the difference of words. Here I had to ask, was Jesus historical? 3 words. This I had to ask, is there a possibility, however small, Jesus wasn't real? 9 words. And then we get the answer. Yes, in the realm of history, the possibility that Jesus wasn't real technically exists, though is considered extremely small, which is what I've been saying. If you are shaking your head disagreeing with me, this is what I've been saying. I'm going to go through the arguments and evidence in the next episode, but this is getting long already. But if the possibility remains, the hypothesis it wasn't real has not been discarded, has not been proven wrong. It still exists. If you are a scientist, or if you want to become a scientist, and you want to pursue the hypothesis that he wasn't wrong, you want to gather arguments and evidence to prove that, it is not impossible. Because the possibility still exists to this day. The problem is, this possibility, it's shunned. The mainstream, right, the consensus, forces those who try to question. You're not trying to prove it, you are trying to question, to follow the hypothesis, which again, in science, there is no sacred. There is nothing that cannot be pursued. And they try to push them down. So not even the question remains. But it's impossible, as I've shown. And why do I think atheists and non-religious people, scholars, right, submit to this? I have my hypothesis. I think mostly because since the probability is so high, it's really annoying to try and be methodologically accurate with these people. I mean, if you go to a religious person like this video and look, once again, I don't know how many times I've said it, I think he was real. But because I raised the problems around it, there you go, oh, so you believe he wasn't real? Yes, even though I've said this many times, there are still people who are going to do this. Or they probably say, then proof he wasn't real. It's like, yes, there is no proof he wasn't real. The same way there isn't no proof he was real. Here, I forgot to get this. Hang on. This is a simple question. You all can ask. These things here, you all can ask. I try to keep as simple as possible. And you can see it's really complex. But this is the question. Is there archaeological evidence of Jesus? I'm asking for archaeological evidence, not proof. Archaeological evidence. There is no direct archaeological evidence. There isn't. Again, this doesn't prove or disprove him, but there is no archaeological evidence for all of this. And I'm going to spoil a little thing ahead of time here because, I think it's important here. Caps is... This is, again, another question you can all ask. Because a lot of people say, well, but the Bible says. Right? If you remember what I said in the first part, you understand where I'm going with this. The Bible says. Yes, but the Bible lies. It's not where I wanted. Here, one example is the genealogy of Jesus in Matthew, historical factual. So you open the New Testament. It's the first text, Matthew 1:1-17. And the answer is, the genealogy of Jesus in Matthew 1 serves a theological rather than a strict literal or historical purpose. In other words, no, it isn't historical. It isn't factual. It is a lie. And why do I say it's a lie? They usually say, oh, it's a theological construct. A theological construct is a theological fabrication. It's a lie. The author of Matthew knew. And you can know. You don't have to go outside of the Bible. You don't have to go to the God-forsaken atheists. You can open your Bible and you can put the genealogy of Jesus on one side and check one by one. It's not going to match. So no, it's not trustworthy. And finally, so we can finally answer the question, the final sentence of the first paragraph of this Wikipedia article about the historicity of Jesus. And remember, it was good enough to serve as a community note. This last paragraph is what turns the Wikipedia article into a Wikipedia article. Wow, it's a Wikipedia article. Do you trust Wikipedia? How can you trust Wikipedia? Yes, right? Because of this, look. However, this is an atomic bomb. This, however, is an atomic bomb. Scholars distinguish between the Christ of faith, as presented in the New Testament, and the subsequent Christian theology, and the minimal Jesus of history, about whom almost nothing can be known. I'm going to read again and try to think really careful about what it's saying. And this is not just Wikipedia, by the way. They search books about the historical Jesus. This is what it's talking about. Once again, however, scholars distinguish between the Christ of faith, as presented in the New Testament, and the subsequent Christian theology, and the minimal Jesus of history, about whom almost nothing can be known. About whom almost nothing can be known. This is why this is an atomic bomb. Because what it's saying is, yes, Jesus is real. But the Jesus of the Bible, of the New Testament, of the Christian theology, this is the Jesus of the faith. This is not the historical Jesus. The historical Jesus, almost nothing is known about. Look at the implications of this. What it's telling us is that yes, Jesus was real, but the one you know in the Bible, this one is not real. This one is a character. It could have been based in the real Jesus, but it's a character. In fact, we are going to see next episode, I believe there is only 2 events that the scholars agree could be really historical, could have really happened. All the others in the New Testament, many have been proven false, made up, as I showed you, the genealogy of Jesus. Because it's funny, right? So Matthew 1 is a fabrication. The genealogy of Jesus is not strictly historical. Again, look at how it's phrased. It's not strictly literal or historical. But again, are you telling me that an author that does not follow history strictly about something as easy as genealogy are really to be trusted when it comes to things like the resurrection? Come on. I mean, if I tell a lie here, it's because I'm unimportant. But if I were important, if people thought I lied about something, I would never hear the end of this. But no, not in the Bible. In the Bible, you can lie. The authors of the Bible can lie, and they did. Multiple times. Matthew 1 is not the exception. And we'll see when we talk about this. Again, minimal Jesus of history, about almost nothing can be known. If almost nothing can be known, what does that mean? We don't have enough about him. Well, but how about the Bible? They are telling us, yes, that's not to be trusted. And I will show you next week, next episode. Again, in the realm of belief, anything goes. We are talking here historical. And this is what we get. And to bring this to a close, look how interesting this is. You see the consensus among scholars right back here. The general consensus that he existed, blah, 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 upon whose life and teachings Christianity was later constructed. How can you make that affirmation if we don't know really who he was? We know almost nothing about him. How can we know it's really his teachings? This is how this is complete insanity. This is the manipulation they do. So, to sum up, before we actually go to the question, there is no proof Jesus was real. We don't know if he was or wasn't. I believe he was. I am of the side who believes it. I am on the side of the consensus. But once again, I will be damned if I let them get away, to the extent talking on YouTube is letting them get away, if I allow them to keep playing me. I mean, if you want to be played, that's your choice. And now, we can finally answer the question. What is the color of Jesus? Finally, we're finally here. And again, I hope you can understand why I had to go into this detour, talking first about what is historical, then about was Jesus historical, because all these things are important to answer this question. What is the color of Jesus? We want to know it historically, but then we have a problem. If we don't know if Jesus is historical or not, how can we know about his color? Let's go with the least probable option. Jesus wasn't real. It's a hypothesis. not very strong. I don't subscribe to it. I find it annoying having to repeat this over and over again, but what can I do? Jesus wasn't real. If he wasn't real, the question is irrelevant. Like, how can someone who didn't exist have a collar? Impossible, right? But then, the most likely alternative is that Jesus was real. But who was Jesus? Right? Who was the historical Jesus? We don't know. And again, look, if we don't know who the historical Jesus was, because we have minimal information about him, and the Bible can't be trusted, as a source, again, it's why I talk in the first part. Human texts, they are evidence, but they don't prove it directly. So the Gospels, and I'm going to go into detail the next episode, they are not enough to prove. In fact, we can prove, not me, this is what the scholars did, can prove a lot of the things that are in the Bible are false, are actually false, like the genealogy of Jesus. So no, you can't trust that historically. You can believe it. Again, you can believe whatever you want, but you can't trust it historically. So if you don't know about Jesus, do you think that his parents are the ones described in the Bible? Maybe. Maybe that part of the Bible is right, and he had a mother named Mary and a father named Joseph. Maybe that's real. Maybe not. We don't know. If you don't know about Jesus, let alone Mary and Joseph. They barely appear in the New Testament. They're irrelevant to the minds of the evangelists, the ones who wrote the Gospels. So we don't know. Right? When it comes to the ethnicity of Jesus, we don't know. But here, I'm not going to leave you with this, right? What are the possibilities? One, he was Middle Eastern. So, Jesus' mother was Palestinian. Jesus' father was Palestinian. I hope you don't want it to be God, because things are going to get a little complicated. I'm not going to talk about this today, but the narrative, which is a fabrication about God and Mary, it's very complicated, especially because Mary was a minor. But nobody cares about history, right? It's like, oh, it wasn't there, so it's today, that's okay. Like, that's not a problem. Anyway, it's fun. Religion's fun this way. But this is the thing, right? This is the most likely alternative. The people who were criticizing those who were raising a fuss against Helen of Troy, but not Jesus, yes, those people are probably the ones most in the right. Jesus was Middle Eastern in ethnicity. Is that the only possibility? Nope. The second one, and I'm going in a decreasing rank of probability, right? So number one is the most likely, so it falls sharply to number two. He was European, or half, right? Everything now comes to this. So why isn't 0 the possibility Jesus, as those people want, was white, European? Well, because of this. Look, this is the Roman Republic according to this map here, Wikipedia Commons, from iFly6. Here. Here's the data, you can check it out. So let me open the map. This is the map, okay? This is what's supposed to be the Roman Empire around 44 BC. Judah, the kingdom of Israel, here, let me center around here, right? Right here. It was annexed by Rome around 63 BC. So 44, as it shows here, is already part of Rome. Egypt, not yet. But look, the Romans were really good in maintaining the roads, right? So to be here, you probably had Roman soldiers stationed there. And those Roman soldiers are from where? They could be from Rome, from Italy, right? From anywhere a Roman soldier could come from. This is the problem. Human variables are terrible because we say, oh, every Roman soldier was Italian. Well, maybe we had Macedonians. Maybe we had people from Hispania. That for some reason, you have some of these stories today, people that for unlikely reasons meet someone and their life changes. So you could have that. They could have been stationed here, merchants here. So it's not unlikely, the possibility isn't 0, that he wasn't European or half. Maybe a family from, let's say, Rome moved to Palestine around this time, and by the time of Jesus, they were their grandfather, and Jesus was born kind of white. Possible. Look how interesting this is, right? And I'm going to go off here, so you have been warned. Here. I ask these leading questions because I know the answer. Was there a tradition about Jesus being the son of a Roman soldier? And the answer is yes. There is an ancient polemical tradition that Jesus' biological father was a Roman soldier named Tiberius Julius Abdus Pantera or Pandera. Tiberius, right? Tiberius Julius Abdus Pantera. This theory, look, this is important, originated in the 2nd century as an antagonistic counter-narrative often used to dismiss the Christian doctrine of the virgin birth. It's a 2nd century tradition. It's fairly old, which is one of the things that you're going to use. If you have heard or watched things about religions, you know that there is a lot of texts that are not in the Bible, right? Gospels, so-called gospels that are not in the Bible. And one of the reasons they say that is because the text is old. I believe there's the text of, what's his name? The gospel, let me see here. Here we go. The Gospel of Judas. And if I'm not mistaken, it's from the 2nd century. And one of the things they use to like dismiss, actually, this is 3rd century, okay. To dismiss it, this is a late text. It's a late text. It's not from the 1st century. If it's not from the 1st century, it's disregarded. You can check it out yourselves. I believe Judas is the 2nd century, the 3rd century, but okay. And this tradition here about Pantera, Pantera is from the 2nd century, so it's late tradition not to be taken seriously, isn't it? Well, I warned you I was going to go off. Here. I forgot to open this. This is something most people don't know. Because religion manipulates, deceives, and lies to us. And this is proof of that. I don't talk out of the top of my head. I talk providing proof. Religion lies to us. This is the stupid way they do this. But look, when were the Gospels given names? You think that makes no sense. It's the Gospel of Mark, the Gospel of Matthew, the Gospel of Luke. These are the names of the Gospel. Haha, sucker. That's what they think of us. We are suckers. That's why we are ba. We are sheep. Because no, look, the original texts of the 4 canonical Gospels were written anonymously between roughly 70 and 100 CE. They were written anonymously. They did not carry the names Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. The Gospel were anonymous. We don't know who wrote them. Nobody knows who wrote them. The familiar superscriptions, right? Superscription, so above what's written, such as according to Matthew or according to Mark, or were added by early church scribes and communities in the late 2nd century CE, most notably popularized by church fathers like Irenaeus around 180 CE. 2nd century tradition. The names of the Gospels, just like the tradition of Pantera, are from the late 2nd century BC, almost 100 years after the texts were allegedly written. Suckers! Yes, they say, because they know this. They had more than enough time. This has been known for centuries, if not over a millennia. That the names of the Gospels, when you read in the Bible, are lies. They made up. They could have fixed this already. All you had to do is remove the names from the Bibles. They print Bibles always. So just go, instead of Gospel of Matthew, write 1st Gospel. Write 2nd Gospels, 3rd Gospel, 4th Gospel. And when asked why, tell the truth, because we don't know who wrote them. Why do you think they don't? Suckers! Bah! Yes, that's why. Because the lie works. Father, Holy Father, who is Matthew, Father? Oh, son, sucker. Matthew was a great man, sucker. He was one of the disciples of Jesus, sucker. Yes, the thoughts are spinning out. This is what I say. Don't get manipulated. Think for yourselves. Search yourselves. You go to a church, they say, Matthew said, Matthew wrote. Let's read the Gospel of Matthew. But Catholics are even worse. The Gospel according to Matthew. According to Matthew is a lie. Again, here. The familiar superscriptions such as according to Matthew or according to Mark were added by early church scribes and communities in the late 2nd century CE. We don't know who wrote them. Then why keep the names? Because it gives the text authority. Matthew was one of the disciples of Jesus. Luke was one of the guy who wrote with Paul. John, one of the apostles. It gives the text authority. Holy Father. Yes, that's why. So when he answers the question, Matthew Sucker was a disciple of Jesus Sucker, you think Matthew was the one who wrote. Also Matthew, someone who walked around with Jesus, he wrote this. This is not an atom on the top of the iceberg, which is the religious manipulations, deceits, and lies. We're only talking here. I told you I was going to go off. We're only talking here about names. So if you want to trust them, good luck. Bah! Now, that being said, there are other possibilities. Again, falling sharply here. Jesus was African. Or half, again. The map again. So here, the Roman Empire. Right? At some point they're going to get Egypt. Let me get correctly. Let's see the date. So Egypt officially became a part of Rome 30 BC. So yes, there is time, Egypt. Here, to travel to Rome, we could take the sea route to the Mediterranean Sea or the land route, all here. And look where Palestine is, right in the middle. So it's a hub. It's a very important hub. That's why Rome would never let Palestine go. It connects Europe to Africa, to the land route. So someone from here, Africa, from even down here, Somalia today, they could have traveled all the way here, settled in the region, and again, their son, their grandson, was Jesus. Likely. No, as I said, not very likely. But is it zero? No. Again, two more that aren't zero. Jesus was Indian, and Jesus was Chinese. And again, they have here. There we go. Two possible, however unlikely. Because look, let me show you guys once again. This is what we get, okay? These are the informations from Kaidor, thank you. Look, this is roughly the Silk Road around 1st century CE, right? Current era. So we have things living here, China, all the way here, look, to Damascus, to Tyrus, to Palestine, right here. India, the same thing. The main route is this, or the caravan. So come here all the way from India to here, Tyrus, Egypt. So in the realm of possibilities, an Indian person, an Indian slave, could travel all the way there, have been sold, have settled the land, married, someone have, you see? Someone from China. You have even Korea here. Oh, look, you have even a route from Korea here. And there are other possible, maybe he was Norse. These are likely possibilities. It's not zero. So when it comes to what was the color of Jesus, historically, we don't know. That's the only right answer. We don't know. Now, what you think, what you want, what you believe, here we go. You could add, he could have been a gray, a reptilian, right? An aborigine from Australia, someone from North America. But although the serious ones is the Middle Eastern, without a doubt, followed by these ones sharply decreasing in probability. And this is finally the answer. Well, we're finally at the end. So, I used this controversy of Helen of Troy to talk about Jesus. So let's use Jesus to talk about Helen of Troy. The first question you need to ask is, was any of this real? Was the Odyssey real? And the answer is no, the Odyssey is not a true story. Well, surprising, isn't it? Mind-blowing even, because, I was sure Cyclops, sirens, gods, witches, men being turned to pigs were all real, were all historical, were all accurate. But Helen of Troy surely was. Let's see. She was actually born Spartan, but look at the interesting element here. She was the daughter of Zeus and Leda. Come on. She was the daughter of Zeus. How are you going to cast that? It's a huge leap. First, to assume people back then were white. They might have been. They might not have been. I don't know. It's like, this is not a subject that interests me. But let's assume they were. How are you going to solve the issue of her father, Zeus? Zeus only turned into white men. Seriously. Are you telling me Zeus could not have turned into any other ethnicity, even African? See how the assumptions work in this game. You have to assume the Greeks are white, then you have to assume a god only turns into white people, so that children are white. And Helen of Troy can be cast as any white person, I will be okay. Because finding a half god will be quite difficult. But now, being more seriously, was she a real person? And then there is no definitive historical evidence that Helen of Troy existed as a real individual depicted in the myth. In other words, it's the same as Jesus, because what we apply to Jesus we can apply here. We don't know. She could have been a character. She could have been a real person in which the character of the books were based on. That's why we can even trust the book. Because the book might describe something, but if the book is not historical, we cannot take the book at face value. The same way with the Bible. But how about Homer? Because, well, you see the discourse online. Homer is turning on his grave. Homer would feel ashamed. Homer this, Homer that. Oh, Let's see, was he even real? Scholars cannot definitely confirm if Homer was a single historical person. We don't even know if the guy was real or not. We don't know. By the way, this is the perfect answer for Jesus. Like if the discourse about Jesus was not corrupted by outside forces, by religious forces, this is the answer we would get. Scholars cannot definitely confirm if Jesus was a single historical person. And they could have had. The arguments and evidence point for that to be true. By the way, I can only dream for a day that will come. Probably never. But anyway, we don't know if the guy was even real. People who using his name are just trying to manipulate us. They don't care about Homer. But the most interesting part is this, look. The legendary status of Homer, often described as by ancient Greeks as a blind, wandering poet from the Ionian coast of Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey. The guy didn't even live in Greece. So who knows who inspired him? Again, assuming he was real, he might not have been. Look, he's from around this area here. And this area is a hub because look, it connects right here and here, Europe with Asia. So you can have people from all places, from all walks of life. In other words, this is anything but historical. The issue, the controversy about Helen of Troy has nothing to do with being historically accurate or not. This is a fight of ideologies. And I can see good points being made on both sides. But in the end, are two ideologies fighting. I don't like ideologies in this sense, especially when it enters in entertainment. You can think whatever you want, but when ideologies are growing and growing and growing, they start affecting. The problem with ideologies are they constrict things. They basically create a box, right? You have to be inside of the box. That's the idea. You have to be inside of the ideology. That's why ideological things become formulaic. If this movie had been released at the beginning of the influence of the woke ideology, then we'd probably see not much controversy, because the formula was not established yet. But by now, the formula has been established. And my opinion is, it appears to me that this ideology replaces talent for a bunch of check marks these movies need for them to be produced, to be released, etc. And when something replaces talent, the formula tends not to be good. In this movie, I don't know if that's how it's done. I don't know if the person were casted because they were talent or to fill some quota. But I can understand those who question that. But again, let's not be naive, because a lot of people are also using that for the other extreme, for misogynistic, for racist purposes. It's a very complicated issue. I mean, I hope the movie is good. I don't have the money to go watch the movie, so I hope it is good. But one thing is certain, and this is what I say when it comes to religion. I always repeat this: never trust what you hear. Right? Because religion and politics are the same thing, and those two areas are pure ideology. So, whenever you hear something from this, if you want to separate the fields, put religion on one side and religion in politics on the other, okay. So whenever you hear something from either religious or politics, never trust it. Go check for yourselves. In cases of an explanation, analyze the arguments. Fact check. See if the person's not playing with you. I mean, it's because people don't do it, but if people start asking their pastors, their priests, about the name of the Gospels, the silliest of the silliest, who cares about the title? But if people start asking them that, I guarantee you, fact-checking would show they would have lied. You would catch these religious leaders lying to you because their Bibles lie. Once again, they could have fixed this. They don't, because the names are a manipulation. They are borrowing from the authority of these characters as they are told in the books. We don't even know if the characters are real, but we are not going to go down that road today. So, who knows? Check it for yourselves. Analyze the argument. Analyze the logical construction. Analyze the evidence and make your own minds. And when it comes to this, it's the same thing. Either go and watch for yourself and make your own opinion, or, like myself, wait until it's out of streaming and watch it and see if it's good or if it's ideological. Until then, the only thing I can say for sure is don't let yourself be played by these ideologues that are using this for other reasons, whatever they may be. Okay, for today that's all. Next time I'm going to go down the arguments and evidence, at least the most important ones for time. I mean, this one is long enough, pertaining the consensus about Jesus being real. So, if you got to this point, I hope to catch you then. Thank you so much for watching, and I see you all next time.